Generally, every employee in Ontario is entitled to overtime, except if they fall under an exemption under the Ontario Employment Standards Act. So some of these exemptions include legal professionals, accountants, engineers, independent contractors, and managers. And generally, the employees are entitled to overtime if they work over 44 hours a week. So there's a bunch of misconceptions about OT, but two of the most frequent ones involve salaried employees and managers. For salaried employees, just because you're not paid an hourly rate doesn't mean you're not entitled to time and a half. It more depends on your job duties, what you actually do during the course of your employment. For salaried employees, just because you're not paid an hourly rate doesn't mean you're not entitled to overtime. More depends on the actual job functions that the individual performs, their duties, and things of that nature. To actually calculate the overtime rate for a salaried employee, you would get their annual remuneration, divide it into an hourly rate, and then you can multiply that by 1.5. And for managers, it's the same thing. Just because somebody's job title is a manager doesn't mean that they're not necessarily entitled to overtime. Managers are generally excluded from overtime, but if they perform a lot of non-managerial tasks during their average work week, they may be entitled to overtime. So again, the courts will look at the actual job function rather than the title given to them by their employer. So if you determine that you can advance an overtime claim, you obviously have to prove that you've worked over 44 hours a week. So you can talk to a lawyer about that and you can gather evidence. So some things that can help you prove you've worked over 44 hours include timestamps, timesheets, emails past 5 o'clock on weekdays or weekends, screenshots of the work you've done. Anything like that can help substantiate that you've worked above and beyond a typical 9 to 5 or 44-hour work week. In Ontario, there's generally a 2-year limitation period for any action that you can bring. So that means if you experienced a loss 2 years ago, or past 2 years ago, you can't bring that claim. However, there's a caveat. It depends on when the claim is reasonably discoverable to that individual. So there have been cases out there where employees claim overtime for years before they're actually dismissed. In order to determine how far back you can actually claim your OT, it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer to see when it's reasonable for you to actually discover your loss. Overall, for overtime, it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer, obviously, and determine whether or not you're exempt from overtime. See if you can pursue a claim and how far back you can claim overtime. After that, it's important to actually gather the evidence that shows that you worked over 44 hours. So again, look at those timesheets, any call logs you have, emails, and things like that to actually substantiate your claim.